Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us. If you've joined, you're probably on mute. If you're not on mute, I would ask you to put yourself on mute. We have a lot of people joining, and it's going to be better sound quality for everybody if you can mute yourself. As usual with Zoom events, we're just giving it a moment for people to come in and to be let in from the waiting room. Yeah, just a few more people joining, and then we'll do some introductions and we'll get stuck in right away. There will be breakout rooms as part of this session. You probably read it in the description. So at that point, it'll be easier for you to unmute and participate in the conversation. But in this plenary, it's just easier if we're all like this. Okay, I think maybe a few more people will trickle in, but perhaps we can get started now. Thanks for joining this session on shaping online conversations. My name is Elena, and I'm one of the directors and co-founders of Buildup, which is a nonprofit that works on peacebuilding in the digital era. And one of the things that we've been looking at at Buildup is this issue of how online conversations unfold online and how that intersects with drivers of conflict and what peacebuilding interventions are possible. Today, I'm really excited about the little panel that we've put together and what they're all going to be sharing about the work that they're doing, looking at interventions in social media specifically. So I'll very quickly introduce them, and then I'll tell you a bit about what we're going to be doing in the session. So starting with Kristen Wagner is at the Center for Humanitarian Dialogue. Kristen, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Kristen Wagner, and I'm the project officer for the Libya/North Africa team at the Center for Humanitarian Dialogue, and I'm based in Geneva at the moment.
Thanks, Kristen. And then we have Frederick Ogenga from Rongo University. Frederick, would you like to introduce yourself?
Good. It's 9 in Kenya, so I'm probably this morning, wherever you folks are. I'm Frederick Ogenga. I'm the director of the Center for Media Democracy and Security at Rongo University, Kenya. So I'm speaking to you from Nairobi. Thank you.
Thank you, Frederick. And we know that Frederick has had a few problems with the connection occasionally, so Michaela will be backing him up also on any issues, technical issues that come up as he's speaking. And then finally, the third speaker is Kate Mitty from Buildup. Kate, do you want to say hello?
Hello, everybody. We're excited to be here with you. I'm Kate Mitty. I'm calling in from Boston and part of the Buildup team. And today speaking about our work within the United States, the Commons Project, kind of using social media around depolarization and anti-racism online. And so interested in exploring that with you all. Thank you.
Thanks, Kate. And we've got two friendly volunteers who are going to be helping out in the breakout rooms. Michaela Ledesma from Buildup. Do you want to say hi so people know who you are? Okay, waving there. And Maud Morrison from the Center for Humanitarian Dialogue, who's also going to be helping out in one of the breakout rooms. So if you see them, they're also just helping make things run smoothly. So we're going to start with a little bit of a plenary, talking about a bit of a framework to understand interventions on social media, and also to hear from you about where you're at. We're going to be using a thing called Mentimeter, which I'll explain briefly. And this is just a way for all of you to share your thoughts about where you think online conversations and conflict interact, but also what can be done about it. I'll then be very quickly presenting a framework that we're using internally at Buildup, which is, we're calling it the pyramid because we don't have a better name for it, for understanding how to locate the kinds of peacebuilding interventions that might be possible on social media. When I finish explaining that, I will ask each of the speakers, of the panelists, so Kristen, Frederick, and Kate, to essentially locate the work that they're doing on that pyramid, to explain what kind of intervention they're doing and how it kind of connects to that framework. That will be sort of a 2 or 3 minute intervention to give you a sense of the kind of work that you're doing. At that point, as you're hearing them speak, what I would ask you to do is to think about which one of these projects you want to hear about in more detail, and to type that in the chat. So type in the chat. We will ask you to, the easiest way to do it will be for you to type the name of the speaker who you want to hear more about. So do you want to hear from Kristen? Do you want to hear from Kate? Or do you want to hear from Frederick? Michaela will then be putting everybody into breakout rooms, but based on those preferences. If you don't state a preference, we'll probably just randomly allocate you to a room. And then we'll be sending you out to these breakout rooms to hear from Kate, Frederick, or Kristen in much more detail about the work that they're doing. So they will be sharing a detailed presentation of their work, explaining some of the results, explaining kind of where they're going with it, if there are no results yet, and some of the challenges that they've faced. We'll then come back to plenary, and in plenary we'll do a bit of a debrief, essentially, asking you to reflect on what you've heard in the breakout sessions, and we'll be using Mentimeter again for that. So hopefully that will all make sense as we do it, and there won't be too many glitches. So let me start by sharing my screen with the first Mentimeter. Okay. Okay, here we go. Okay, so at this point, you already know what this is. So the way that Mentimeter works is I'm going to forward to a slide now, and it's going to show you, if I can do it. Okay, maybe I can't do it. Oh, here we go. Okay, sorry. Obviously, the first time I do it, it's not, there we go. Okay, sorry about that. Okay, so you're seeing at the top of this slide, you'll see that it's suggesting that you go to menti.com and use the code that is on the slide to give your answer to this question. And so the question that we want to kind of unpack here is to what extent is social media a tool for peace, and to what extent is it a driver of conflict? And because saying it broadly, saying, you know, is social media a tool for peace or a driver of conflict is too much, because it's there's too many aspects of social media. What we're asking you to think about are 7 aspects or seven characteristics of social media, and to consider whether you think that it's more of a tool for peace or more of a conflict driver. So if you go ahead and go to that link, menti.com, and then use that code that you're seeing on the screen, so 739791, you should be able to vote on this. I can see a few people are already starting to submit their responses. These are obviously not all the features of social media, right? But I think it becomes interesting when you start to unpack, really, when we talk about social media, we're talking about the ability to do all these different things, right? The ability to share content, to connect with people, to target content to your interests, to post anonymously in some places, that's actually quite important, to be notified when there's new content or reactions. I love this. It started like a constellation and now it's ended up all clustered somewhere in the middle. I'm going to give it a moment longer. There's about 16, 18 of you who have answered this question so far. We're getting kind of a clustering now, which is actually not what I was expecting at all. So this is pretty fascinating, right? I think, you know, this one here, which is you can post anonymously, is kind of ending up, is the one that is ending up more clearly less of a tool for peace and more of a conflict driver, although some people are still rating it as a tool for peace, presumably because there are places where it's only through the ability to be anonymous that people can discuss certain topics. The ability to connect with many people, obviously rating much higher as a tool for peace, but also somewhat of a conflict driver. Really interesting. I think the one that I'm most fascinated about is the ability to target content to your interests, because I guess if I can share my bias, if I were voting on that one, I'd definitely say it was a driver of conflict and not at all a tool for peace. But I guess if it means you can reach people with the right message. Okay, I think everybody who's going to vote has now voted. And maybe that's opened up our appetite a little bit about the complexity of some of the issues that we're dealing with interventions on social media. So let me see if I can advance to the next slide. Okay, so now those were, let's say those were the characteristics of social media, right? You should now be prompted to vote on this new question. And the question is now, how much of a threat to peace are these things that are happening on social media? So this is not like the previous one was the things you can do with social media. Here it's things that we know are happening on social media. So we know that there's hate speech, doxing, and cyberbullying, right? That's quite obvious. We've put them together. These are like very direct attacks on individuals or on groups of people. We know that there's recruitment into armed or ideological groups, right? There's a lot of extremist groups that are using social media to recruit. We know that there's disinformation targeted at certain groups. We know that there's a thing that people often refer to as manufactured consensus, which essentially means you are pretending, or you're sharing and retweeting and giving weight to a piece of content when in fact there isn't consensus about it. There's the deliberate polarization of identities. That's often done through presenting memes or sharing certain types of content. There's misinformation and algorithmic profiling. This is slightly different from disinformation. Disinformation is like, we're going to deliberately put out this information and we're going to target it to certain people. Misinformation and algorithmic profiling is what happens when that disinformation naturally begins to spread because of the structure of social media. And then we have effective polarization and identity construction, right? I think we're all quite worried about social media, is my takeaway here. But again, really interesting the way these are shaping out. I think the fact that disinformation is so clearly the front runner, let's say, in this question, I wonder how much of that also has to do with the current situation in the pandemic and what's happened around the pandemic. Excuse me. Okay. Again, I think everybody who's going to vote has voted now. There's still a few coming in. We'll share these later, but again, I think this is a really interesting, I think what the reason for sharing this question was to again prompt us to think about the complexity of what's happening on social media. You know, when we say that there is hate speech and polarization in social media, actually there's a lot of different things within that, right? So, okay. So let's think about peace building interventions now. There are certain things that can be done on social media, right? That are aimed at reducing polarization and reducing hate speech.
Helena, you okay?
I have my son's cold. It's not actually COVID, in case anybody's worried about that, but I am having a coughing attack. So do you want to, Kate, since I know you know this slide, do you want to just take over for a moment?
I can totally explain this. Yeah, so I mean, this is just really thinking about what are the ways in which we can use social media to engage and intervene. And so the different characteristics, just thinking about, one of those could be thinking about it from the platform scale. So thinking about ethical or tougher platform terms of services, terms of service and controls. Another could be really looking at the platform structures. So thinking about the changes to platform structures, including algorithms or notifications. Another could be monitoring of hate speech and content moderation by peace actors, whether that's by the platform or by other actors sort of outside of the platform. Another could be thinking about digital literacy programs, really sort of targeted at social media users, or looking at depolarization and behavior change programs, really targeted at the users. And another one thinking about peace messaging programs. So really also, again, sort of targeted at the users and thinking about how can we use social media for messaging and sort of targeting of peace. And so what we really wanted to see here is, from your perspective and experience, is what's more effective versus less effective in social media interventions. Oh, Helena, you're on mute.
Yeah, just unmuting. Thank you so much for taking over and letting me cough that out. No so I think this is also really interesting what's coming out here, because what this is saying to me is that a lot of you are seeing essentially individual behavior change as the way to address some of these drivers of conflict on social media. Because what digital literacy programs are targeted at is essentially for individuals to begin behaving differently, right? So really interesting. Even though behavior change on its own got a lower score, I think those two are quite connected. Whilst ethical or tougher platform terms of service and controls doesn't seem to be rated as all that effective. So super interesting. Great. I think we're gonna move on. Maybe a few more people are voting, but we can see those results later. Okay, so all of that was really building up to sharing this framework with you. So this is the framework that we've been using at Buildup to try to understand what it is that is happening on social media and how it might connect to peace building interventions. So a lot of our attention, I think, in previous in previous years prior to 2020 was really on the tip of this platform, right? On hate speech, on recruitment, on overt targeting. And by overt targeting, I mean, it's very obvious that this content is being targeted at a certain group of people. And these issues, the issues of hate speech, of recruitment on social media, etc., they can be addressed by platform rules and terms of service and by content moderation, whether that content moderation is by the platform themselves or whether it's by civil society actors. So if you're looking at this pyramid, you'll see that what we've tried to do is to put on the left-hand side the things that the social media companies themselves can do, except for the last one, the one on nonviolent communications, which I'll get to in the end. And on the right-hand side, things that that civil society might do, except for the one at the very bottom, which I'll get to at the end. And so the tip of this pyramid is really the kind of signals of polarization that we've been focusing on, right? And one of the things that we've been thinking about quite a lot is that over-focusing on that tip of the platform could also lead to the signals of conflict being buried or sent elsewhere. There's been a number of articles recently that point out that when hate speech gets taken down from mainstream social media platforms, that hate speech doesn't go away, it just migrates to other platforms. So there's a question to be asked about whether we need to engage with things that are deeper down in this platform, in this pyramid, right? Now, a lot of us are already talking about disinformation, manufactured consensus, identity polarization, covert targeting, and I think that's also why when we were talking about the interventions, a lot of people honed in on digital literacy, right? If you want people to not take on disinformation, then the way to address it is to have digital literacy programs that teach people to identify disinformation to identify when they're being covertly targeted, to know that that's a possibility and therefore be attentive to it, right? And I think that's extremely important. But I personally, I'm particularly interested in the third layer of this pyramid. And the reason for it is that I think it's the one that it's harder to disentangle. So if you look at the very bottom of the pyramid, this idea of human communication and human neurology, the reason that's at the bottom is that social media is both meeting a need that we all have, a need to connect, and exploiting a number of weaknesses that we all have, which is essentially the fact that our brains love heuristic simplicity, and so are drawn to things that we already agree with and that we can very easily understand. So what's interesting for me about the third layer of this pyramid is that it's the things that none of us can fully understand because they're happening to us and are all around us. It's the difference between disinformation and misinformation, right? Disinformation is information that is false or misleading and is put out there with the intent to deceive. Misinformation is all of us retweeting that. Why do we do that? Why are we drawn? Why does disinformation spread? It spreads because of certain behaviors that social media platforms are incentivizing us to take on. And I think that's what I'm particularly most interested in. And that's why effective polarization is already is also on there, right? It's this kind of deeper level that we're beginning to unpack and beginning to really understand. So hopefully that kind of prompted a little bit of thinking. There's a lot more content around this platform if people are interested that we can touch on later. But I want to give the floor now to our three panelists. And ask you to tell us a bit about what each of your interventions on social media has been about and where you might locate it on this pyramid. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so you can see them more easily too. So Kristen, would you like to go first?
Sure. So I work for the Center for Humanitarian Dialogue, and HD, as we call it, is a private diplomacy and peace mediation organization, and we use dialogue and mediation to help prevent and mitigate and end conflict, ideally. We have a long history in Libya, and we've been working there for the past 10 years or so. In the Libyan context, this means that we're actually working with many different stakeholders, so on very local, national, and international levels, to encourage the prioritization of the peace process. It's no secret that social media can play a major role in generating conflict, and Libya is no exception to this. So as a result, at HD, we've recently been looking into if and how we can better incorporate the subject of social media into our work in Libya. That said, so our intervention at present is perhaps minimal in the sense that we're actually still in the process of examining different ways of doing better monitoring of content online, understanding how it impacts events on the ground, and then also figuring out how we can take it a bit further. We're also looking at considering ideas relating to engaging more online in the name of depolarization, as well as considering social media as a core component of mediation and dialogue. So with that in mind, I would say that HD is really dabbling somewhere closer to the top half of the diagram, as we're looking at these issues of hate speech, disinformation and misinformation as well, and then also peace messaging. It's hard to say because we're not necessarily executing full-fledged interventions yet, but I'd say that's where we lie based on some of the ideas we're considering.
Thanks, Kristen. I think that was really useful as just an overview of where you're at. And I would say that we deliberately wanted to invite three speakers who were at very different stages of the different projects. So Kristen, I know you are, this is very much the beginning of this work for HD Center in Libya. Kate and the Commons are in the middle of their intervention, and Frederick and the Mascarni team have just finished one part of their intervention. So that was also deliberate. Before I pass the floor to Frederick, I just want to remind everyone that if you already know what breakout room you want to be in, go ahead and indicate it in the chat, and Michaela will make sure to put you into the right breakout room. So Frederick, over to you. Do you want to tell us briefly what your intervention is about?
Thank you so much, Elena. our intervention actually is born out of a collaboration between the Center for Media Democracy, Peace and Security and Buildup. And this is trying to adapt the Commons methodology to the local Kenyan context. So Mascarni was born, Mascarni is a Swahili name for home, was born out of exploring digital peace building avenues with the youth in Western Kenya in collaboration with 6 universities. So this project consists of about over 70 students, youthful students, and over 15 faculty members who have managed to build a digital peace building infrastructure that is focusing on online polarization around the usual issues that affect Kenya in terms of peace and security. So these are politics, ethnicity, and COVID-19. So when you look at the Kenyan ecological context, you'll find that the political temperatures are heating up because we are going for another referendum, a heavily contested referendum, because it's happening a year before a succession takes place, because the current president is finalizing his last term in office. So the stakes are high, and usually the youth who are always found online find themselves in those spaces spreading hate speech and all that. So we are at the digital literacy phase of the pyramid. And we just finished a pilot, which was quite successful, funded by the Knowledge Platform, Rule of Law and Security at The Hague. And we are now planning to scale Mascarni nationally. So we are actually at the scaling level on phase 2 of the project. And of course, if you want to hear more about Mascarni and the nuances that are embedded in there, we welcome you to a breakout session where we'll be giving you more information on what we really dealt with in the Mascarni project. But we've realized that the youth are actually the center of digital literacy and peace building. Thank you.
Thank you, Frederick. That was a beautiful summary of what you've all been up to, which is also so inspiring. Kate, do you want to tell us about the Commons next?
Absolutely. I'm excited to follow from Frederick's description of Mascarni, because I think we've been iterating a lot with this version of the Commons within the Mascarni work. And so that's been like a really incredible feedback process. So in brief, we've been running the Commons since 2017, really in the United States, and sort of asking, 4 years ago, I think it was the question around what can social media do if we look at it from individuals to individuals, engaging on social media, what is the role of social media in depolarization? And so have tried that in 2 different variations, where the first 2 variations were what I would say is like Peacebuilders engaging directly in social media. Literally, we had, I think, 10,000 conversations on Twitter and Facebook. And really just sort of asking, like, how do we use similar models around depolarization, but translate them into social media? And what can we learn in that process when we're taking some of that theory and research and bringing that into what I would say is sort of a social media practice? This year, from sort of August of this year until August of 2021, we're sort of asking, how do we take that experience and work with folks that are social media users to explore and really create kind of a movement of folks that are on social media and using social media thoughtfully and sort of intentionally around depolarization and also anti-racism within the United States. So that's kind of the goal of this year's social media in the United States.
Thank you, Kate. So you really have a tough choice, I think. So to recap, Kristen talking about social media analysis in Libya, and then the interventions that might come out of that, which could be around tackling hate speech or peace messaging or some disinformation work as well. Frederick talking about the Mascarni project in Kenya, and the work there being mostly around engaging youth to engage online through digital literacy and then through an intervention as well. And Kate talking about the work of the Commons in the USA, these conversations to depolarize. So it's quite a rich set of choices. And the reason I'm talking now is because I'm giving Michaela time to put everybody into breakout rooms. So I'm just going to keep talking until she says that we're ready to go, and then we'll be ready to go. And when she says that, you will all be sent out into breakout rooms if you've been on Zoom events by now. At this point in 2020, you probably have been. When the time is up, we will bring you back into the plenary. But while she does that, I just noticed that you were all posting some really interesting comments in the chat while I was presenting, which I didn't see because I was looking at my slides instead of looking here. So it's really interesting to see how different people were really kind of having a reaction to what would be a conflict driver, and also the difficulty. Was it Taylor saying I was almost all fives on the last slide? Yeah, it is very hard to differentiate between them, right? To really understand which of these is going to be more of a driver of conflict. I've been struggling with that as well. Yeah, and Saeed Udi from Chemonics, you made a comment about Parler in particular. You know, there was a really great article about Parler and about the fact that because so many people have. I'm just going to wait for a moment to make sure that we have everybody back. Kate, Kristen, I can see you, and Frederick is probably somewhere joining us as well. I hope that was interesting and generative. It definitely was for us. And, you know, ideally we would now have kind of like a plenary where everybody could share what they learned and what they took away. But because we were slightly concerned that we would have too many people to do that, we're going to be using the Mentimeter presentation again that I was sharing before. So if you still have that open, you can go back there. And the idea is to use that as a way of sharing some of the learnings that we've come to, and I'll just talk through some of them because otherwise we won't be able to do it. We've got about 20 minutes left, if I've got my timing right. Yeah, 20 minutes left. So let me go back to sharing my screen, and you can also go to the presentation yourselves. So let me just do this. Okay, this is the pyramid again, which we don't need anymore. Okay, so just a very kind of open prompt initially. What is one thing that you learned that you can take forward in your work? And I think here, you know, if while you were listening to whichever breakout room you were in, you sort of had an idea of how you could take forward some kind of an intervention on social media in the work that you're doing or in the context where you're engaged. It would be really wonderful to hear that. I think we're curious to see how this landed and whether it resonated with all of you. So if you want to post an answer, and then we can look at them together. Wow, that's I thought people were going to not be as, maybe it's just that I'm in Europe and so I think it's late and I'm kind of like, but of course most of you are probably in a different time zone and have lots of mental space left. So this is great. So people are talking about social media as a role in peace negotiations, to foster constructive discussions, but then also a recognition that there's still a need for advocacy to convince some people, mediators in particular, that social media is a conflict issue. Using social media as a direct intervention tool to disrupt cycles of misinformation rather than just a monitor. I think that's really interesting. We have seen, of course, I think a lot of the early work of social media in peace building has been around monitoring, right? Monitoring hate speech, etc. So that's really interesting. Engagement strategies for harm reduction online, with specific examples of words used. fake social accounts and thread people by using them so you cannot be identified. I'm not sure how that would work, but that's interesting. Like, what would happen if we start using some of those tactics ourselves? Maximizing using incentives to really engage participants in online training and workshops. Yeah. Motivated to look for more disinformation or negative information and gently jump in and voice my concern in a kind way. That's really great. That sounds like somebody who might enjoy, if you're in the US, you might enjoy joining the Commons. A place of mutual support in this work. Yeah, I think that's something that we hear a lot from people who are trying to engage on social media, right? The need for support. Yeah, and need for more research. I couldn't agree more. I think we're just scratching the surface on the research. Yes, and this is Mentimeter. I'm really happy always when people learn a new tool by using it. So glad that was of use. These are some great ideas. I think we're going to try to collate some of the things that have come up in this Mentimeter and share it back so other people can also see the conversation that we had. That was part of the reason for doing it this way as well. So thanks for sharing those. And I'll move on to the next slide. Oops. Oh, I'm clicking on something instead of moving. There we go. So this one's a bit more kind of directed. So the previous one was, one thing that you can take forward. I think this is really, what are some concrete things, having heard about these experiences, what are some concrete things that peace builders and mediators can do to shape online interactions? So you've heard about what the Commons is doing, you've heard about what the Mascarni peace builders are doing, you've heard about the thoughts that the Center for Humanitarian Dialogue has about what needs to be done in Libya. What are some very concrete things that peace builders and mediators can do to shape the way that online interactions happen on social media? What are tactics that you would recommend or that you want to try out on social media? A few of these appeared in the previous slide, but this is really interesting. So, yeah, I'm going to let it settle a bit before I try to make any sense of it. I think what's interesting for me here is that there's quite a bit around engaging and intervening, but also around modeling, right? Modeling behavior, intention setting, being proactive, questioning, but then also around being kind and empathizing and practicing, yeah, asking questions. Very interesting. So of course, countering disinformation is also appearing, which is something that I think we've heard about quite a lot before, but it's interesting to me that quite a few people are kind of talking more around the asking questions, modeling behavior, being proactive, yeah, being an upstander, thoughtfulness. Really interesting, yeah, to see where we're at with that. Okay, and I have one more slide for you to try and think through. So if you're going to take this forward, if you're going to go back to work after PeaceCon and propose a way to use social media in your work, in the current work that you're engaged in now, the programs that you're running, that you're in charge of, or that you're participating in, how would you primarily use social media? What's the thing that you would gravitate towards? We've narrowed down the choices here because we wanted to see kind of what are the primary things that are coming out. That's really interesting. So this may be partly by design of the kind of content that we shared with you, but I think also just because of a recognition that we need to go deeper, that if you notice, this is essentially people positioning further down the pyramid, right? So hate speech monitoring and content moderation is the very tip of that pyramid that I shared, and the others are further down in the pyramid. So I think this is really interesting. And I think there's so much that can be done in this space still, right? So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. We'll share the results of that Mentimeter so that everybody can see what everyone else said. And I think I just wanted to, since we've got a few minutes left, I just wanted to give the opportunity to each one of the speakers to maybe make a short closing statement about what you took away from the conversation that you had in your breakout rooms. So maybe we'll start backwards this time just to change it. So Kate, would you like to go first?
Yeah. Yeah, what did I take away? That's a good question. Let me skip to Kristen and then come back because I haven't had time to think through that yet.
There was a lot there. There was a lot there. And I'm also just putting you on the spot. So Kristen, do you want to say what you took away from it?
Sure. I feel like I'm in the same spot as Kate is. I mean, I don't know. I guess I would say that to an extent, it feels like we're all kind of learning about this together. It really feels like a bit of a niche area, and my takeaway from what everyone said is that there's a lot more kind of exchange of experiences that needs to happen and information sharing between different people that are doing work in this space, because it seems like a lot of people are thinking about it, but I think you know, opportunities like this to speak about it on panels and have these dialogues are really helpful in terms of honing in on best practices and trying to figure out how to incorporate social media into building peace. And yeah, I think that's what I would say.
Thanks, Kristen. It sounds like there's so much there, right, that could be pulled out. Kate, are you ready now?
Yeah, I think one thing that it just keeps striking me is, yeah, as Kristen said, we're all sort of learning this space, and just wanted to invite you, if you're in the US and interested more, to join us in the comments. And I think like one of the other pieces that I just keep anchoring into the comments is that I think it's social media can be a really incredible space for sort of practicing peace building online, you know, like whether that's like misinformation or whether that's polarization, and that, you know, is really beautiful when it happens collectively and we can sort of all learn together. And I also think that there's something really powerful that can happen when we sort of all take that up as like a forum and a media to learn from. So just wanted to hold that.
Thanks, Kate. Frederick, are you still with us? I wasn't able to.
Yes,
there you are. I couldn't see.
Yeah, I think my takeaway is the inevitability of social media spaces. They invaded our universe. We spend most of our time on social media spaces. So I think when I listen to everyone, I think it's high time we find multiple ways of adapting to social media technologies and see in which we can utilize social media to help build peace and security based on, of course, the contextual issues that are facing us, depending on where we find ourselves in different parts of the world. So it's something that is a burden, and we need to be ready to share that, burden going forward.
I think that's wonderful, and so many points of connection between all of you. So thank you so much for joining us on this session. I'm hoping the PeaceCon organizers are very happy with us finishing 5 minutes early and giving you all time to look at the agenda. I've seen there's actually a number of other events on digital peace building, technology and peace building, social media and peace building that are definitely worth taking a look at. So hoping to see some of you there. And yeah, thank you for joining us and for being such a great group participating in all the discussions.